To a very special program. A great welcome to our friends at the Department of Consumer and Business Services and at the Health and Human Services there in Salem. I'm Kerry Tymchuk, Executive Director of the Oregon Historical Society, and we're pleased that you could join us today for a very special program with the woman of the moment, Governor Barbara Roberts. This program arose back in January. We did a program here at OHS with Governor Roberts commemorating the 30th anniversary back in January of 1991 of her historic inauguration as Oregon's first woman governor. There was so much acclaim for the program, and it was so popular, and some of a certain person named Mary Jagger saw it and thought, boy, this would be good for folks at DCBS and down in Salem. So we were proud to do it again. So before we get on the program, I want to begin, and I'm going to turn it over to Andrew here in a minute, but want to begin with something we always do at OHS, and that's to begin with a land acknowledgement. Here in Portland, of course, those of you in Salem, if you're in Salem, we're all on lands that were once homes to Indigenous people. So we like to mention here in Portland that Portland is, on the traditional homelands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, Watlala bands of the Chinook, and the Tualatin Kalapuya, and many other Indigenous nations of the Columbia River. We acknowledge the ancestors of this place and understand that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. And so, Andrew, I think you have some opening remarks here before we begin with the conversation with Governor Roberts.
Thanks, Kerry. Hello, Governor Roberts, and thank you and welcome to all who have tuned in today. As Kerry said, I'm Andrew Stolfi. I'm the Director of Oregon's Department of Consumer and Business Services, Oregon's largest consumer protection and business regulatory agency. I also serve as chair of the department's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. And it's from both these roles that I warmly welcome you to this program with the Oregon Historical Society featuring Governor Roberts. So today's event is a continuation of the celebration of Women's History Month, coordinated by our DEI Council. Governor Roberts paved the way for so many throughout her life and career in public service. We're delighted that she's joining us today. For example, as a mother of a special needs child, Governor advocated to require Oregon public schools to guarantee educational rights to these children. As the proud husband of a Salem-Keizer Public School District special ed teacher, I've seen firsthand the benefits of the very policies for which Governor Roberts advocated and for which we owe her many thanks. Governor Roberts' administration was also able to secure funding for the Oregon Health Plan to increase the number of children in Head Start, and was known both for its strong support of gay rights and appointing women to leadership positions on the courts and in state government. Thank you, Governor, for taking the time today to help us all learn more about how Oregon became a better place because of your leadership for all. Thank you, Kerry.
Well, thank you, and Governor, welcome again. And a little reading recommendation. You've heard of Oprah's book club. Well, this is Kerry's book club. I would all recommend, try to hold this up so you can see it. It doesn't show, there it is. Up the Capitol Steps. It's Governor Roberts' autobiography, A Woman's March to the Governorship. A fabulous book, and we're gonna kind of take you through the highlights of the Governor Roberts story, starting at the beginning, which began in Corvallis, Oregon, and mostly in Sheridan, Oregon, where Governor Roberts, you grew up a small town girl.
I definitely was a small town girl, an Oregon small town girl for sure.
And what was small town life like in Sheridan, Oregon?
Well, it was quiet. There were less than 2,000 people who lived in Sheridan at that time. And it was before the prison, the federal prison came. It was before the casino came a few miles away in Grand Round. So it was a pretty quiet little community. And, you know, there certainly were no women role models for me in that period of time and in that small town. But it was a community of people who knew each other and mostly liked each other. And it was, I enjoyed being in high school. I had lots of friends and I was secretary of the student body. I always found something with a little work in it. And my father ran the local machine shop and my mother worked at the local newspaper, which is now no longer there. So yeah, we were very active in the community, my family and myself.
In fact, Governor, you write in your book, you say, I was student body officer, class salutatorian, speech competition winner, cheerleader, editor of the school newspaper, all this and much more. And no one ever suggested I think about college.
No,
That's what it was like in the 1950s in small town blue collar USA. Girls married and had children and didn't go to college.
and disappeared into the kitchens of America.
So, and initially, that's what you did,
Well, I didn't quite.
more or less. Yeah. So you got married right out of high school. So
I got married before I graduated from high school, graduated, and then joined my husband, who was in the military in Texas, in southern Texas.
and so yeah, and so you moved out of Oregon to Texas and started a family there.
Yes, yes. And I was there for 3 years before I returned home to Oregon. And I certainly found out that state to state, our country is very, very different. I
So
moved into a state that had very different attitudes than those I was used to in Oregon. So it was a learning experience, both good and bad, but knowledge is important no matter where you get it. And I had to get used to a poll tax if you wanted to vote. And they still had that in Texas in the 1950s, and signs that said drinking fountains for whites only. It was a different atmosphere for me.
and after returning to Oregon, it was one of your children really that began your path to public service, advocating on his behalf. Tell us that story.
Well, my son Mike, who was born in Texas, when he was ready, he went to preschool for a while, and then he started to the first grade, and he was in the Portland School District, and they sent him home with a note saying he could not come back, that he was not teachable. And so we went up to Oregon Health Sciences University and had him tested, and they labeled him severely emotionally disturbed at a time when we did not use the term autistic to describe such children. And so here I was with a 6-year-old that could not go to school, and there were no special education laws here in Oregon or nationally. So my son was in a position of finding himself without school, without learning, without a future. And they recommended I put him permanently in an institution. It was a terrible blow for a parent. And for me, it was life-changing, because at that point in time, I thought, I am not putting my son in an institution. He is going to go to school like all other children. I pay taxes like other parents, and my child is going to go to school. And that's when I became an unpaid community lobbyist, I guess, a citizen lobbyist, I guess is a more correct term. And Frank Roberts was my state representative, and he became my tutor to learn how to lobby in the Oregon legislature. And I started the battle for my son's right to a public education. And 6 months after I began that battle, that fight, that work in the Oregon legislature, Oregon had one of the first laws in the United States for children with disabilities to be able to go to public school. So it changed Mike's life. It changed the lives of thousands of other children. And it certainly changed my life. Frank Roberts and I married, so it changed that part of my life, but it also changed my life into understanding that an average citizen could make a difference in the political arena if they stepped forward and took on the fight. And I did that, and it changed my life forever.
And you began your political career with the august body of the Park Rose School Board. So
Right, 10 years on the Park Rose School Board, and part of that time, 4 years of that, I also served on the Mount Hood Community College Board. So it was a great learning experience for me to be on those school boards. And though I didn't have a college education, I was also doing some part-time college work at Portland State during that time. So I was sort of surrounded by education, both at home and in the school board and at Portland State. So it was again, just every day was a new experience for me.
And once you and Frank were married, you started to work in the legislature, as many spouses of legislators did then and still do today, because they leave their houses and homes and go down to Salem for 6 months. And you made that trek, and you were a legislative staffer, getting to know the process.
It was a great way to learn it, because it's right in your face every moment of every day. So we married in 74, and in January of 75, I was a staffer in Frank Roberts' new Senate office, and learning the process and finding it really exciting and wonderful. And I found myself thinking, boy, this looks like fun.
So much fun that you, first you branched out your electoral career to the Multnomah County Commission.
I did. I filled an appointment on that commission for almost a year, and it was a very exciting time in Multnomah County and at the county government, because we were doing our land use plan. We made the decision to put light rail into the Portland metro area. So there were a lot of big changes happening at the same time. And the Equal Rights Amendment was up for consideration around the nation in state after state. So there was a lot of that issue kind of interspersed with the light rail and the land use was the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment.
And then the next step in your political climb up the Capitol steps was to be a legislator yourself.
Yes.
Move from staff to the big office to be the legislator. How did that come about?
Well, it came about because my state representatives, I think he saw me drooling to get a chance to go, but I would not run against him. He was a friend. He was a fine legislator. And he said, I'm retiring, so I think, Barbara, you need to take a look at this. So George Starr, wonderful man. And so it was a perfect time for me to move over to the House while Frank was in the Senate, and to step into a race that didn't have an incumbent member of my own party holding the seat at that time. So, and I had helped a lot of other members of the Democratic members of the House get elected over the years. I'd been going door to door and helping them with other things. So when I came to the House, I wasn't a stranger there. I had been there as a lobbyist. I'd been there as a legislator's wife, and now I was there as a state representative.
And very much enjoyed the work, and were effective at the work from the get-go because you did have that training.
Yeah, and I served on the Revenue Committee from the very beginning. And if there is a place to learn about state government, it's on the Revenue Committee of the House, or Ways and Means, one of the two, where the money's raised and where the money's spent. And it really added to my career politically to understand the taxation system of the state, where the money came from, who paid it, and what affected it. And so that was the lucky break for me in a lot of ways. A lot of people thought revenue was dull, but it was really exciting for me.
So Frank was not only your husband, he was your state senator, and you were not only his wife, but you were his state representative. Did the two of you ever disagree on an issue when you're in the legislature?
Yes.
And you were right, he was wrong, I'm assuming. So
no, he was right. I was just behind the times, I guess is the way to, because at that time, Frank introduced the Death with Dignity law for the first time in the state of Oregon. And I just thought it was too risky. I thought it was too scary. I thought it was too personal. And it turned out that I was wrong, and he was definitely
right. So,
and proved it as a leader.
Well, a couple of terms into your service in the legislature, there was an opening in to be the majority leader, the Democrat leader in the House of Representatives, a job that no woman had ever had before. And you decided to climb that hill, to try to give that hill a climb against some big odds.
I did. I had Bill Bradbury was running for it. I was running for it. Tom Troop from Band. I mean, we had really talented people running for the office. but I won and became the first woman majority leader in the House, and actually by then in the Senate and at that time. So it was a new experience for everyone. And in the office of the majority leader was no longer the place that the guys sneaked off to for a beer in the afternoon. Out of here, you guys.
So, were there other hurdles with being a woman that the male? I know there are some male legislators just said that it wasn't time yet. They couldn't see a woman being leader. And
Well, they couldn't have seen it even now.
right.
Legislators. It was just hard for people because it was leadership was almost synonymous with male,
So,
and women were the people who were the secretaries and the staff and did that kind of work, but they did not lead. And so it was a new thing to find rules and order and other kinds of for instance, the voters pamphlet, which I believe is probably the best tool any candidate in the state has. I required all of my candidates to get their voters pamphlet in to me a month before it was due, so I could evaluate it and say, this, you're using this photograph. So it was a new experience for those many of those male legislators to have someone saying this photograph is not good enough, this material is not good enough, and you're not working hard enough. So it is really personal because the legislators live and work and they're together all the time, and you don't want to ruin relationships for the real work, but you do have to do the leading, and I did.
So after a term or so as leader, you had another choice. Down one path was perhaps to stay in the House and become the first woman Speaker of the House of Representatives. And the other path was to take a chance and run for an open office of Oregon Secretary of State.
That's right.
What led to your decision?
Well, I had watched Norma Paulus, who was the first woman elected statewide in Oregon, and she was being termed out as Secretary of State. I had watched her in that role for a long time, and everything about that office I loved. I loved the archives, I loved the election issues. There was so much about that office that interested me, and I thought had a lot of opportunity for change and growth. And I just thought there were other women in the House prepared to take on the speakership, but there weren't that. But Secretary of State meant you had to win a statewide race. And I thought those women would be fine in the House as Speaker, but I wasn't sure that they were prepared to run statewide. It's a really, Oregon gets very huge when you're running statewide. Those 36 counties just sort of seem to expand. And because I had background in a number of those counties in some of the rural areas of the state, and my family had come out of Eastern Oregon and Southern Oregon. When they came on the Oregon Trail, a big part of my family settled down in the Roseburg area. So I had knowledge of the state on a very broad basis. And I felt that I didn't think anybody could outwork me. I worked like a banshee when I started. I just worked. And so I knew I could outwork. And the issue was, and I knew people could accept a woman in Secretary of State's office because they'd had Norma there for some years. So that wasn't as big of a hurdle as it might have been. But it was another thing to try to figure out how to survive for a year and a half, running statewide all the time, every day, and raising the most money I'd ever raised as a political candidate. Doesn't look like much now, but like a lot then. And I knew that there would be competition in both the Republican and Democratic primaries, and there was. So it was an uphill climb.
But you won a fairly comfortable victory in the primary and a very comfortable victory in the general election, becoming Secretary of State. And at your swearing in the next January, you made national news when in a different way through a performer at your swearing in. Who was that performer?
Well, I was sworn in, and at the ceremony for Secretary of State in this Capitol Rotunda, the Portland Gay Men's Chorus performed the music for that ceremony. It had never happened, as far as anyone could determine, that a gay organization performed in any state capital in the United States. And it was a statement I wanted to make and needed to make and did make. And it was in every newspaper in Oregon and all over the country. It was the story. And I remember people saying to me, having done that, I would never win another statewide office.
They were wrong. So,
They were wrong. Yeah.
and throughout your career, you have been a tireless and eloquent advocate for equal rights for all, including, of course, the gay community. That's been part of your hallmark as a leader.
Thank you. Well, and, when I started out, working for my son's rights, I think the rest of my career and the rest of my life were about equality and rights for everyone, to make sure that everyone had their opportunity in Oregon, at least. And I could work for that, and I could speak for that, and I could stand up for that, and I did.
And you won re-election to Secretary of State, and then just a year or so into that term, a phone call would change your life.
Yes.
Tell us about that phone call.
Well, the phone call came from Governor Neil Goldschmidt, and he gave me a little inside information that it was likely in the next few days that he would step down from his re-election campaign, that he would not run again. And it wasn't public yet, but he said, I thought you might be interested to know this. Well, to a politician, that's a sign that someone is encouraging you to make a step. It was a really, really big issue that he stepped down. And of course, Dave Frohmeyer, who was the Attorney General, was already running against Neil Goldschmidt for that position. And there were both Democrats and Republicans who were ready to take on the governorship. And I had the advantage of about 48 hours that other people didn't have to know that. I never worked so hard in 48 hours of my life. And it was a big decision for me. I wanted to do it. I had been to the Kennedy School of Government during the time I was Secretary of State, and really took the leadership role very seriously there, and came home thinking someday, maybe, but I wasn't planning on that someday being 1990. I thought it was a ways down the road, but you have to take advantage when you get an opportunity like that. If you want to do it, you've got to do the work, and you've got to step up and take the chance. And I did that.
And off you went on a year-long plus campaign for governor, and traveling the state incessantly and battling eventually against Dave Frohmeyer, very respected, very well known.
Yes.
You were down in the polls from the start.
Mm-hmm.
And how'd you do it? How'd you turn it around?
Well, I mentioned what a hard worker I am. That was part of it. And I like people, and it really helps to like people when you're campaigning statewide, that people will smile with you and laugh with you and reminisce. In Eastern Oregon, I talked about my family coming on the Oregon Trail. My staff on the governor's race thought it was a silly thing to talk about. It's not silly in Eastern Oregon if your family came on the Oregon Trail. So I talked about my family and their daughter dying on the trail. And I talked about how lucky I was that they had come to Oregon, and that I got to be born in the state because they had come here. So it was about making people identify with who I was and what I cared about, what I loved, which was Oregon. And I think that made a whole lot of difference. And I took on some hard issues. There was a ballot measure on about closing the Hanford nuclear power plant, and I I came out in favor of that, and it was very controversial. So the one thing I wasn't during that campaign was overly careful. I stood up for what I believed in. I voiced my opinion, and I talked with people in every county of the state. I showed up at every Rotary, Kiwanis, and League of Women Voters meeting that went on for that year. So I, and someone pointed out later I didn't think about it so much at the time. It's nice if people like you and not just agree with you. And it turned out that that was a factor, I think, in my race. Even though people didn't agree with me on every issue, they could see my love of Oregon and my caring for the people of the state, and the work I had done previously as a legislator and as Secretary of State. I'd started the new archives building during the time I was Secretary of State. And so that allowed me to talk about Oregon's history in every county in Oregon. So I think it was some of that added to the hard work and the money raising. The money raising was horrible. It was really hard. If a poll comes out that says you're 20 or 30 points behind, it's a little hard to raise money. But we just slowly made up for that monetary issue with a lot of other, and we ran really good ads on television and the radio. We were really positive and not attacking. And I think people were happy to see that.
So January of 1991, Barbara Roberts from Sheridan, Oregon, who would have thought back then, becomes Oregon's first ever woman governor. What was going through your mind as you raised your hand and took that oath of office?
Oh, there was so much happening in my mind. That my father had died 3 weeks before I was elected governor. And so he would have been so excited and so proud. And so I had that, and my mother was there and my sister was there, and I just, my kids, and it was just, I looked around the room at the swearing in, and I saw the faces of people I'd worked with, people I loved, people who cared about me and who cared about the things I cared about. And it was very hard not to tear up in that moment when I was supposed to be showing myself as a new strong leader, because there was so much emotion in that moment for me. And it has always been that way when I think back on that moment, because there were such mixed emotions for me that night with my family in the loss I'd recently experienced. And Frank and I talked about it after the ceremony was done, about how it's hard to separate the tears of joy from the tears of loss. And that's what I experienced that night.
So your 4 years as governor were to be very challenging ones, because the same election that you won, Oregon voters in their wisdom also voted in a tax limitation, which would affect Oregon's revenue. And that was to be, just a challenge to you for your entire term.
There was no question on the night that I was elected governor and Measure 5 passed, harming schools and community colleges and small cities across the state, and the budget in general. And the House of Representatives went from Democratic to Republican. So we had one house in each party. And so it was a very, very challenging election night, and it carried over for all 4 years. But that I won, and that was wonderful. And I had the occasion afterwards to spend a couple of months later to spend some time with Dave Frohmeyer, and who had been my general election competition, and a fine man, a good citizen, a caring father and husband. And I felt that Oregon had made the right choice with me, because I was the candidate who would stand up and be counted. But they had turned down a man and a talented lawyer and a good statewide office holder. So many times in my political career, I was challenged by such talented Oregon candidates. Donna Zajan was another. So I think that part of what you have to understand, it's not about making enemies, it's about gaining friends in the end.
We're joined today, Governor, as you know, by state employees, and
Yes.
talk about the work that you working with such a dedicated crew of state employees through all the state agencies.
Well, one of the things I did was when I became Secretary of State, I did it with all the agencies that were part of the Secretary of State's jurisdiction. And I started doing that when I became governor, visiting the state prisons, going to the agencies of government and meeting the people and their leaders and their workers, and really trying to figure out from them what the work was like, what they needed to make it better, how the budget cuts we were making because of Measure 5 were affecting them. So I had the chance to listen and learn from those state employees, and they were welcoming in terms of my willingness to listen, but they also knew that I had the job of cutting the budget, and they had to help me get there. And I couldn't have done it without them, without their willingness to do the tough cuts and make this tough suggestions that nobody wanted to make. And I think my reaching out to them both for support and help, but also for suggestions, made me a better governor. And I hope it made those agencies get through those tough times without quite as much pain.
We've got some questions coming in from chat, Governor, which I'll pass along. One is, what was your biggest obstacle to securing respect and leadership as a woman? So,
well, people assume you don't know things. They assume as a woman, you don't know about timber, you don't know about the economy, you don't know about agriculture, you don't know that those are not girl things, you know. And so you know about cooking and maybe mental health and schooling, education, you know, those are things women know about, but they don't expect you to know about international trade. They don't expect you to know that when you grow onions in Eastern Oregon, you make French fries out of them and they get business growth. So the economy was greatly improved by the time I finished being governor. And we had the greatest economic development in terms of international trade that we'd ever had in the state's history. We created new jobs, new businesses, and new economies. And we added to that the thing that's critical to new economies, which is well-trained workers. And we worked on really improving the training of workers in Oregon. So I think people found out, I did know about timber. I grew up in timber community. I grew up in farming community. I knew about those businesses, and my time on the revenue committee in the legislature taught me about how you make that tax structure work for the economy and for the people and for the workers. So I was fortunate in having the kind of background I did is in school boards and county government. Each of those things added a layer of knowledge and experience that I think proved itself to make me a stronger governor, a more respected governor, I hope, and hopefully by the end of it, a governor that people could look at and say, she had it tough, but she took care of Oregon, and that's what I wanted them to feel and know.
so what you're saying is even governors have men try to mansplain to them when
Yeah. Oh, that.
that's so.
Yeah, it was interesting because there were some things that governors usually got invited to because they were governor that I didn't get invited to while I was governor. They were boy things. And we just said, so what? I get it. I get the weekend off, and all the other guys are out there working in Eastern Oregon on this little venture they're on, and I'm not there. And so I get a little time off this weekend.
Well, the role model you said, Governor, continues. As you know, just last week with the swearing in of Andrea Valderrama, for the first time in Oregon history, a majority of the Oregon House, 31, is women, 31 of the 60. Talk about how that makes you feel. So,
well, it makes me celebrate. I mean, I remember when Ruth McFarland was the only woman in the state Senate for a term. And I think there were just enough women in the House that time that if we left the floor of the House to go over and watch Ruth do something in the House, in the Senate, they didn't have a quorum. If the women just left the House. Well, now they're not going to have any problem with that. But it was so unusual to have women in so many positions. And now I look and the House has all these women and the Senate does. And the Supreme Court of Oregon is a majority of women. It just amazes me. It pleases me. And I think having women at the table, being part of the conversation, being part of the solution, being part of the discussion makes Oregon stronger. It makes us better as a state, and it makes us better as a people. And so I'm happy when good people get elected to office in a system where our election system is as fine as anything in the country. And so we've got the election system and we have the people running, and we're getting quality legislators and office holders of both genders. And that makes me really happy.
so a question has come in, Governor, about the fact that in the news these days, we see men behaving badly, and men in public office behaving badly. Were there reports of this during your governorship or service? And how did you protect women during your leadership?
Well, when I first came to the Capitol as a lobbyist, a citizen lobbyist, and then as a staff person, there were some things I learned very quickly. And there were some people, men, that I did not get in the elevator with if there was no one else in the elevator. And I passed those names on to women when they came to the legislature, when they came to the Capitol. Eventually, those men got out of the shadows and we found out who they were and what they were doing. But it was happening then, and as it is now. But Oregon didn't tolerate that very long. They spoke up, and the women in Oregon spoke up, and those people were eliminated from service in the state capitol, whether they were a staff person, whether they were a lobbyist, or whether they were a legislator. They didn't last very long in the state capitol in Oregon. And I really admire women who have the courage to step up on those issues. It's not easy, and women did it in Oregon, and I can remember lots of them, and the need was there. And the problem I think you have seen in the Capitol in Washington, DC, is that people are accepting the behavior and not believing the women who are coming forward. And so that's the answer, is the women must come forward, and then we have to take as fact that you don't come forward with an ugly story like that unless it's true.
And now, as you said, as Governor, as you know, 4 of the 5 state officials are women. The majority of the Supreme Court, a majority of the House, the governor, of course, Kate Brown, our second woman governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and our Labor Commissioner, Val Hoyle, who, spoiler alert, is listening in today. Val is. So if you want to say a word to Val, you go ahead. So.
Well, Val and I became friends when she first ran for the legislature, and I've supported her all the way through her career up till now, and will continue to. She's strong. She's very efficient and effective at what she's doing, and she is protecting things that matter to the workers of Oregon and to the citizens of Oregon. And so I am just so excited to see how many women are in so many roles, and they're doing such fine work. And that's exactly what we want to happen. So, and you know, the truth is leadership is not about gender. It may be how people measure gender sometime, or measure leadership sometime. But I think as time goes on, it becomes more evident as you see a vice president of the United States who's a woman, as you see our statewide women that you just mentioned, 4 of them, just the state treasurer is the only male left in that statewide office list. And the courts right now, I mean, when I was governor, I appointed over 50 members to the court, more than 50 judges. And there were a huge number of women and racial minorities in that. It changed the face of the court. And what we've done now is change the face of the legislature and statewide office. So I think it would be more and more likely in the future that gender will not be the measurement of leadership.
Great question from one of the listeners. We are living in a time with extreme partisanship where it feels like sometimes we'll never be able to reach across the aisle. What advice would you give to current and future leaders to bridge that divide?
Well, I think the voters have to help bridge that divide. If they see someone who is acting without merit and without reason on a piece of legislation or law, and the only reason they're casting that negative vote is because it didn't come from their party, that's the person you send home to go back to logging or farming or whatever they were doing before. Honest to God, you cannot let, as voters, you cannot let people behave that way and let it go unchallenged. And what we're seeing in Washington, D.C., particularly right now, is that kind of behavior. If something is right for America and right for our citizens, regardless of party, you need to step forward and make that decision for the good of the people. That's not what's happening in some of the halls of leadership in Washington, D.C. We've seen some of that in Oregon. We've seen some of that with people making it impossible to get through a legislative session because of that behavior. But I think Oregon voters, and nationally, I think the voters are becoming more aware that this is not serving the public. And every legislator, every senator, every Congress member, every person who holds public office has a responsibility to act for the good of the people, not for the good of the party. That's not what we're here for. Doesn't mean we never do it, but it shouldn't be the reason we serve.
By the way, Commissioner Hoyle just responded. She says, I have benefited greatly from Governor Roberts' mentorship and from her paving the way for so many of us who came after her. She is someone who knows how important it is to help other women on their leadership path.
Thank you. Thank you, Val. I appreciate that.
Here's a tough one, Governor. We are still from another listener, we are still in the midst of a pandemic, and it will be years before a sense of recovery to the life we used to know. What do you advise for the future? Words of wisdom for the future.
Well, let's start with the current, because you don't get to the future without getting through the current. And the first current thing I would say, it is such an amazing thing for me to be here looking at you and me, and we don't have masks on today. That is the easiest thing we can do. It is so simple, it is so cheap, and it is so much safer. So we have to start out doing the little things we can do. The vaccine when you can get it, being careful about being around people who may be not acting in a safe way, not distancing, and I can't understand why people have trouble with the little part when it gives us a chance for the big part, which is to come out the other end of this pandemic with people who survived it, people who are healthy and strong, and with an appreciation that we have all gained for being with each other again, for being with family again, for showing up at a party again, for showing up at a picnic again, for going to a parade again and celebrating parts of Oregon and places in Oregon that are so special. I just look forward to the time that I can be back in all 36 counties in the state with people I've known for years and years and places that I have cherished through my life as both a public figure and a citizen of Oregon. So if we want that back, that future back. We got to take care of the current time and each other.
Think positive and test negative. That's my motto.
That's
So
fun.
another question coming in. What advice would you have for a young woman who has just begun her career in public service in state government in Oregon?
Well, the first piece of advice is always learn Oregon, know the state, learn the state. Go get your Oregon Blue Book and study every time the Blue Book comes out. You read it from cover to cover. That's the Oregon Blue Book, and it's everything you need to know about Oregon to get started. And the second thing that's very, very high on my list is never act without considering the ethics of the choice you are making. Your ethics and honesty from the beginning to the end of your public career are absolutely essential. And when people ask me what I'm most proud of in my life as a public citizen, as a governor, I say never once as governor. People disagreed with me, but never once did anybody question my honesty or ethics in public office. And I'm more proud of that than anything else I ever did. So I would say to that young woman, read your Oregon Blue Book. Every time the new one comes out, you get it.
And I'm holding it up, Governor. The one just came out.
Yeah.
There it is.
Oh, good. The new one. Oh gosh, I don't have that yet, but I have everyone up till that one. And I will get it soon. So it helps you understand the state better. And I used to travel with my grandchildren and we carried the Oregon Blue Book in the car, and we'd cross a line that said, entering such and such county, and I said, well, open the book and see what it says about that county. What do they grow? What's special there? And so my grandchildren thought that you learned about everything that way. You just took out the Blue Book in the back seat and read about it as you traveled across the state. So I really believe that for me, when I was running for Secretary of State, it probably helped me win that race, because we carried the Blue Book and files on each county in the trunk of the car. And we crossed into a new county, we took that out and saw who was elected. And I would show up sometime better informed than the Kiwanis.
Well, Governor, I'm in the Blue Book, the address of 500 Summer Street Northeast. That's the address for the Barbara Roberts Human Services. But what's it like to have a building devoted to human services named in your honor?
Oh, I can't wait to be able to go back in it. I've got family who've moved back to Oregon and they have never seen it. They've seen the outside, but that says Barbara Roberts Human Services Building. But the inside of the building, with the figures in there that are displayed with the recognition inside the building. And I am so proud of that. I have a school named after me and I'm proud of that. But this is the sort of the crowning glory of getting to hold the governor's office and then having the thing you care most about, which is human services, having that be the building that's named after you. So I read the speech the other day again that I gave on the day that we dedicated the building in my name, and it still moves me to think about that and read that. It was a very short speech, but it was so significant for me, and that building is significant for me.
We didn't talk about yet, Governor, as you were preparing in your last year as governor, not only dealing with all the crises that face a governor, but dealing with the personal crisis of a husband slowly passing away. And the pressure on you during that year had to have been tremendous.
I really wanted to run for a second term, and I had unfinished work I felt that I wanted to go back to. But Frank was ill for a long time, and he was bedridden and wheelchair bound, and we knew he was terminal. And after a while, it became clear that when you run for office as an incumbent, you not only do the service of the governor during that time, but you also are campaigning for probably another year of that time. And my sister had cancer. my father had died just before I was elected governor, and Frank was on his deathbed. And I thought, I can't do this. I can't do it all. I can't be the daughter I need to be for my mother, the sister I need to be for my sister, the wife I need to be for my husband who's on his deathbed, and the governor I want so much to be. And if you can't do it all, you do the part that only you can do. And I knew there were other talented people ready to step up to the governorship. And I knew that I had a role to play. And I also needed some time to grieve. And after Frank died, I found out it's very hard to find time to grieve where you're dealing with sending the National Guard to Desert Storm and dealing with the prison problems and dealing with the budget problems. Not much time for grieving in that. And I decided that grieving was more important than a second term as governor.
And it's been, but in the years since you've left the governorship, you have been very busy, remaining involved, even serving in office again for a little time. And one of the questions that just came in says, you're an inspiration. What will you do for the rest of the day? That's the question. What's a typical day for Barbara Roberts like these days?
Well, actually, I'm taking my partner, Dawn, to the dentist. We have to get that stuff taken care of, we get that. And there's no Blazer game tonight. So I'm almost, if there's a Blazer game at night, that's where I am in the evening. So, but we may try to sneak out for dinner tonight, because if they close everything again into the restaurants on Monday in Multnomah County, we haven't done a real dinner out yet, and we have both of our shots, and so I think we might sneak in that dinner just before we have to change status in Multnomah County for the COVID. So, but typically I do a lot of time on the phone and on email, because I'm still doing a lot of work for some nonprofits. I'm not on the board any longer for Special Olympics, but I still do a lot of work for them and for the Death of Dignity issue. And I'm doing some things for them right now. And I have my hands kind of full from time to time at Portland State, working on the Women's Leadership Center there, which is going through some hard times. And I'm preparing for a meeting to talk about how we save the Women's Center at Portland State at this difficult time. So I never am short of things to do. And I always have these candidates who keep calling and saying, what do you think I should say about? And once the voters pamphlets are in, then that kind of stops for a little while. And then I get the candidates who are saying, I'm working on this brochure, and can I say that you're endorsing me? So it's ongoing. The candidate thing is ongoing. I mentor a lot of candidates and find a lot of joy and fun in that. And there's always some new talent on the way up. And it's fun for me to get to know that talent and spend time with those people who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow.
Well, you'll enjoy that. Someone just asked if you could evaluate the Blazers' talent. Do they have a championship this year?
Well, it's a little tough right now, but the new player, Norman Powell, who came on, has shown great promise. And with CJ being back and with Nurk being back after their long-term injuries, they're not looking their best right now, but I think they still have a chance to get there. And I'm sort of a diehard Blazer, and I just can't give up that they can't do it. So I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to give us some good basketball, at least before the end of the season.
He just gave you a thumbs up, the person who asked that question. So. Do you have your book in front of you, Governor?
This one?
Yes. And you want to go to the bottom of page 232?
232, let's see. Close. Oh, wait. Bad glasses on for this. I'm almost there. 231, that's close.
Hmm.
232.
So the last paragraph, beginning with, I close my inaugural address saying, because I think this truly sums up all that you are. So why don't you read us that paragraph, and it goes over slightly to the next page. So
I closed my inaugural address saying, you are looking at a woman who raised 2 children, one of them autistic, by herself. You are looking at a person who struggled for years to make, I'm having lighting troubles here, to make ends meet. You're looking at a part-time student still working on and committed to earning my college degree. And you were looking at a woman who got, sorry about this, it's a lighting issue, involved because she saw a wrong that needed to be corrected. And today you are looking at a woman of the greatest state in the nation. Am I proud? You bet I am. Will I make a difference for Oregon? I never wished more for anything. And then I added my earlier words, for each generation has but one chance to be judged by future generations. And this is our time.
well, that, Governor, I think is we've had about 150 people join us today, and it's a way to win. Veronica, I think, were you going to offer some closing thoughts?
Good morning, Governor.
Good morning. Look at you.
You know, you are my inspiration. I am, thank you so much, Governor, for being here. Thank you, Tim, for making this happen for us. I will tell you that it has been my time waiting to meet you, because your stories and your words inspire me when I moved to Oregon. When I first arrived to Oregon in '95, I was moving from a governor that is not even remembered in California. And I heard that it's a woman governor in Oregon. So here I go to Oregon to follow that woman. And one of the things for me that was so inspirational, it was your smile. How a woman can handle all these guys with a smile. That means that she has a secret and she's not sharing yet. And I wanted to know a little bit about that. And suddenly I was here feeling like I was at home, because I feel like Oregon is my home. Now we're talking about 30-something years, and the seeds that you have planted continue to grow within me and the state. Because if it wasn't for your inspiration, I don't think I would be doing the things I'm doing now. Thank you for all you did, and you continue to do for us, and to help us all Oregonians to be great. You have been one of the greatest gifts for Oregon and for our people. And you know, your smile keep inspiring me. That's my measuring of people. If they know how to smile and they know how to lead, I have to follow them. And you are that for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Andrew, for DCBS for hosting this program, and for all those who attended. And thanks to all the state employees for what you do. I know from experience that working for the government, the state, federal, county seat, whatever it is, it's a tough job, and we appreciate all that you do. And I know Governor Roberts, you appreciate what they do as well.
I do indeed. I do indeed. I've been fortunate to know so many of those state employees and see their work and the quality of commitment. It still warms my heart.
Well, thank you all. Everyone have a great weekend. And as I said, follow my advice and think positive and test negative.
And buy your Oregon Blue Book.
And buy your Oregon Blue Book.
Yes.
And wear a mask. So
Yes. Wear your mask.